Thank you, Martin, once more. And hello, again. So this is early stage work, so I'm going to try to leave plenty of time for questions because I'm eager to hear your thoughts. I'm also cognizant that I am the last speaker standing between you and lunch. So, immersive entertainment scrambles our conventional understanding of producers and consumers of artistic works. In the traditional model, producers create a work that consumers watch, read, listen to, play. There are really sort of two modalities of production that dominate this traditional model. The first is industrial production, incentivized through exclusive rights, and largely, though not entirely, closed to downstream remix. Then there's also commons-based production that relies upon non-IP incentives and norms, and is largely, though not entirely, open. Although traditional models incorporate some degree of consumer participation in the creative process through things like remix and forms of participatory fan culture, immersive entertainment actively requires the consumers to be creators alongside the producers. This shift means that across immersive models, intellectual property plays a distinctly secondary role relative to its role in traditional, particularly industrial production. And here I should note that I'm using intellectual property in the legal sense rather than the colloquial sense, right? So I'm referring to copyright specifically rather than to the works associated with a franchise. And I'm super grateful to Wendy for shaving a couple minutes off my presentation by giving you a little bit of a primer on IP. So in this paper, I argue that IP in immersive entertainment serves less as an incentive to create or a means of recoupment, and more as a locus for coordination and governance amongst the producers of immersive works, the sponsors of those works, and the participants. So let me start this morning by laying out sort of these three models. Then I'll talk a little bit about some examples of this new dynamic, and this is empirical work that's still in progress. So as I collect data, if anyone can recommend interview subjects, I would be grateful. And then I'll explain how sort of IP rarely provides complete protection for sponsors' creations, is often under-enforced as to co-creators' contributions, and as a result, although the particulars vary, immersive entertainment represents a shift from rights-based to governance-based creative production. And I'll close with some normative suggestions. So let me start with a few words. I keep on looking back here and it's not there. Let me start with a few words about industrial versus commons-based cultural production, these sort of two contrasting models. So traditional industrial production relies on copyright as an incentive to create a work that would otherwise be at risk of free appropriation by others. And in this model, it identifies a canonical work that is subject to robust protection, a book, a song, a script, and so forth. Exclusive rights then form the basis for monetization and collaboration strategies through contract. By contrast, in commons-based production or user-based production, this describes a few phenomena that take place within what we tend to call IP's negative space. Here, the absence of formal IP creates the conditions for production. And there are lots of opportunities for downstream remix relatively free of the constraints of formal IP. Immersive entertainment happens in the middle. It sort of defies the boundary, right? Because in immersive entertainment, there is IP present, right? As I'll explain in a few examples. That IP, though, is not the predominant form of economic model, right? Doesn't form the predominant basis for recoupment. And because immersive entertainment is so much more participatory, the producers are not just producing content for the users, rather the producers, what I call the sponsors, are making content in which participants play an active creative role. And that quite radically shifts the production model from traditional industrial to something more like co-creation. And that shift means that intellectual property plays a different role. So let me offer a few case studies to show sort of what I mean by this role. So I start with Meow Wolf. So here, this is an immersive art exhibition. There are several of them. I'm sure many, maybe all of us, have seen them. Here, the participant role is not interactive with other characters, right, and other people, for the most part. Right? The participant role is to walk through the exhibit and take part in a story that's enabled through the physical art and some interactive components provided through a phone. The sponsor here, Meow Wolf, coordinates the productive efforts of multiple artists. The core story is IP light. It's a little bit difficult to identify what's the work in copyright terms that comprises a Meow Wolf installation. But the contributions of the individual artists are IP heavy, right? Paintings, drawings, music, right? These contributions are traditionally protected by IP. And so the process of building the work involves utilizing the IP-heavy components mediated through interlocking contracts and often employment law to create an IP-light experience. And although audience interaction does little to change the storyline, that aspect of the work, at least, is still sort of producer-consumer. My second example is Sleep No More. Right? So Sleep No More is immersive theater, in which the core IP is actually in the public domain. So the core IP that comprises Sleep No More is Macbeth. The scripts and story beats and choreography are unlikely to be the subject of strong copyright protection. That's because unlike traditional theater, where a playwright can write a script, right? That script is robustly protected by copyright, but the outline of a story, right, which is what happens in Sleep No More, is less so. There's a fair bit of improv by the actors in this production, and although they have certain places they're supposed to be and cues they're supposed to take and sort of story beats that they're supposed to engage with, they also engage one-on-one with the audience. And so those story beats and sort of the choreography of the production are unlikely to be the subject of strong copyright protection solely by virtue of how the law works, right? Copyright just simply doesn't protect those things. Here, audience participation is limited, but present, right? The actors can interact with audience members for one-on-one encounters. They're given free rein to create some as they go, but not entirely. And so my last example is kind of the apotheosis of that actor and participant model, which of course is our dear departed Galactic Star Cruiser. And here, the IP dynamics are a little flipped. So the core IP is Star Wars, right? In a way, that is among the most strongly protected IP that all of us work with. But that protection is for the films and the books and the television shows and so forth. The entirety of Galactic Star Cruiser may be thought of as a derivative work of those copyrighted films, books, stories, and so forth. But as a legal matter, that's a little fuzzy. And in particular, the story that plays out on Galactic Star Cruiser is highly unique and customized to participant interaction. Again, the actors have sort of story beats that they're supposed to hit. The setting is original, but not fixed in a way that's protected by copyright. And the physical sets, often are a little underprotected as well. So this maximal audience participation, right, both actors who are given only sketches of their characters and audience members who can create the story as they go, kind of represents, I think, the sort of pinnacle model of this kind of creative production, where both producers and participants are co-creating together. So what does this mean for intellectual property? I've got a couple of descriptive conclusions and a couple of normative conclusions. Descriptively, these three examples suggest that intellectual property in this space, is not operating the same way that it does in traditional media, right? In traditional media, the purpose of IP, at least the way that we talk about it in law and economics, is that IP is an incentive to create, right? That the book, the film, the music, would not be created but for the presence of an exclusive right, because in the absence of that exclusive right, free writing decreases producers' incentive to recoup their investment. Here, it's working very differently, right? Because the nature of the artistic works are often either unprotectable or underprotected by copyright in particular. And so instead, I posit that IP is operating here as a signal around which various actors engage in private ordering to accomplish this creative production. IP provides the sponsor to an ability to begin to set the terms of the interaction, to say sort of here is the core of the work, right, around which we are inviting engagement, right? That engagement comes then as, or rather provides a starting point for contributors' own creative efforts that together amount to co-creation. The boundaries of the IP right are nascent enough that those participants themselves maintain some significant artistic freedom. It's often said that immersive sets, immersive experiences are a sandbox, right? The idea here is that IP defines the boundaries of that sandbox, but not necessarily the nature of the play that takes place within it. And IP governance here can be relatively formal, as in the case of Meow Wolf, or relatively informal, in the case, for instance, of Galactic Star Cruiser, balancing the contributions of producers and users to create sustainable projects. Normatively, I have sort of two preliminary takeaways from this set of descriptive observations. One is that the presence of IP, particularly strong IP, may be destabilizing in immersive experience environments. And this is a learning of the commons-based production model, where IP often crowds out non-IP through economic dynamics that we can talk about in the Q&A, or if you come find me later. If that's true, then that also suggests something about IP law as a body from this work, which is that perhaps instead of focusing law reform efforts on strengthening IP, it actually might be more productive to focus law reform efforts on delineating the boundaries of IP more clearly. Because if IP is playing this sort of governance role, it's actually not the strength that's important, but the definition of the boundaries of intellectual property. So let me stop there. I've got a couple minutes for questions, and I'm eager to hear what everybody thinks.